like have children at home or who, might be in one of those high risk categories. But, it's been a challenge. I mean, there are a lot of us who are raring to get back to the newsroom, but we are also trying to be really mindful of those colleagues who don't feel that way. And I feel like we may well be in this situation till the end of the year. I mean, we have something called Slack. I don't even know how many companies use it. I think a lot of them do. But we can, it's a way of, in effect, texting on our laptops. So we're all in touch with one another all the time. But I will also tell you, I do think that a remote newsroom hurts. It's not the best thing for the news content.
We are with Sharon Grigsby, must-read columnist from the Dallas Morning News. And Sharon, I have one more question before we go to break. I know over the last couple of years, you've written a number of stories regarding mental illness. And I wanted to kind of see how you got into writing stories on that particular subject matter and even what you learned through those efforts.
That's a subject that's very close to my heart. I originally began work on it when Mayor Rawlings put a big emphasis on mental wellness in the city. And I don't know, Shawn, that might even have been you were in his office. It was earlier in his tenure. Mm-hmm. What happened was those editorials I wrote sort of morphed into my work on Southern Dallas, and I came to realize how lacking the mental health resources are in Southern Dallas, and yet how many of the mental health calls that come into 911 or other avenues come from Southern Dallas. So I wrote about that landscape. When I moved into Metro, I became increasingly aware of the newest plague, if that's a decent word, of mental illness here in North Texas, and that's the teen suicides. And death by suicide of our young people is something that's just growing unabated. And so in this last year, even during the pandemic, I've tried to keep tabs on that and write those personal stories. I mean, as y'all know, the best way to get people to be interested or to care is to tell a story through a personal lens. So that's what I've tried to do. I'd say as far as what I've learned, one is that there are some good people, particularly with the county, with the Meadows Institute, with UT Southwestern and elsewhere, who are working hard to get a facility up and running in Southern Dallas, and I continue to write about that. I also have just been so impressed by the bravery of parents who have lost a child to suicide, that their courage in talking about what happened and trying to open other people's eyes, because I think that the biggest issue, as you guys know, it is with people in denial, whether they're in denial about depression or bipolar in a loved one or in denial about a death by suicide. But it's something that's super important to me. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a columnist, is that I could write all of my columns just on that one topic. Instead, I tend to sort of ping pong around among the things that interest me the most.
This is Deconstructing Dallas. We are with Dallas Morning News Metro columnist Sharon Grigsby. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about Dallas and what's going on in the city. So this is Shawn Williams with Brian Trimble. We'll be right back right after this.
Welcome back. Deconstructing Dallas. He, Shawn Williams, me, Ryan Trimble. We're joined by the Metro columnist for the Dallas Morning News. She, of course, Sharon Grigsby. And Sharon, we were talking before the break. You know, you have spread your wings. You're covering more than Dallas these days, but a lot of your stories still involve the city, what goes on around the city of Dallas. I wanted to ask a few forward-looking questions, but first, where do you think we are in the city of Dallas? What's your take on, how are things in the city of Dallas? Your finger on the pulse, maybe. You know, it's been quite a year with COVID. You know, some good, obviously some bad, but maybe we've highlighted some of the bad. Maybe we can focus on it. What's your take on the city of Dallas right now?
I think the big question for our city between now and next year's municipal elections is going to be the relationship of the various city council members and the mayor. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, that those relationships have been really strained. The budget process was particular, so I at times wondered if we were going to be able to pass a budget this year. And I'm interested in how the mayor and the council rebound from that, and whether we can have a constructive way forward. So that's a big question mark for me. Elsewhere at City Hall, I see a lot of things working very well. Now, I know it's sometimes difficult to tell because of the pandemic, but I've been impressed with how Animal Services and the Park Board, the whole park department continue to do such a really good job. I do see points where things almost slip through because it's hard to keep the community involved. I wrote about that recently with this plan to potentially put a bridge across Bachman Lake, which I think I referred to as a solution without a problem, that came out of the aviation department. And, you know, it's journalists' jobs to keep tabs on that stuff and call people out. But, you know, I'm always optimistic. We laugh, Shawn and I, at times that, you know, I can be a bit of a Pollyanna. I do want to see the glass half full. And I'm proud of this city for how we've come through the pandemic. And while there's so much work to be done in regard to the racial and social justice reforms, I recognize many people were not happy that the final budget reflected some of the reforms people wanted. I do think this is a city that is engaged in those issues. I mean, maybe that is partly, and Shawn can speak to this in some ways better than me, because I've been here so long. I contrast, you know, how things look from how we were talking about issues, or more specifically, ignoring issues back in the 80s and 90s. So I am hopeful, but I do think a key to fixing or continuing to fix things in this city is a council and a mayor that work effectively together.
Staying with the Dallas theme, Sharon, you know, you've written a couple of columns that focus on DPD. Obviously, public safety is something I follow, and something you and I talk quite a bit about. And you had one column about Chief Hall prior to her announcement of her resignation, and some things you thought about how she was handling the police department. But now that she's announced her resignation, you know, a good friend of mine, Jolie Robinson, is no longer in her position. What do you think lies ahead for DPD, for the department? What do you think the department will be looking for a new chief? And those of us who live in the city, what should we all be looking for?
You know, Shawn, I would love to be able to give a better answer to that than I probably will. I'm enormously disappointed that Chief Hall's tenure did not go better than it did. I had such high expectations for her, or high hopes, and I like her enormously. There is definitely a culture problem in DPD. I don't know how exactly that is fixed, except it has to start with trust. And if I thought of anything that Chief Hall was lacking, it was her ability to trust the people around her. And I would hope that the next chief is somebody who can come in and accept other points of view and that help, because I think that will get us where we need to go more quickly. I've had really the privilege to talk to a lot of officers, especially officers of color within DPD, and I do think there's change. I think that improvements are being made, but at the end of the day, I put my trust in TC Broadnax. I think he's made some really good hires. They haven't all been good, but I'm excited to think about who he might bring into the job. And I'm kind of curious, Shawn, you're closer to it than me. Does that make sense to you, or do you see it differently?
I really like your answer that you gave. I was biased from the beginning, and I can't be biased because I worked so closely with the command staff that was in place before. And so, I know that there are two things that kind of don't always jive. Number one, I always was said that one thing that was difficult for the department is, unlike what you were seeing in the private sector, the top of the department and the leadership was, everybody was in their 50s and 60s. And there wasn't enough people, as you're seeing big companies who have CEOs who are 35 years old now. You're seeing people run NFL teams who are 33 and 34 years old, and that didn't match up with what we were seeing in the department. We had such a huge exodus in the leadership that it almost flipped overnight. And so I think there has to be some sort of happy medium between, not losing too much of our institutional knowledge within the department and having some young supervisors have an opportunity. I guess I don't know if I said anything with that answer, but that's kind of where I am.
No, I think that's a good answer. And I think that it is part of what we can do better on next time around. I mean, I still mourn the departure of some people in that department for the very reasons you said. And I just want to go back to one thing you mentioned, Shawn, about Jolie Robinson. I'm sure not everybody was happy that I wrote a column that said it's not really Chief Hall's that I'm going to miss as much as Jolie Robinson. And that's just because a lot of people aren't aware of what Jolie Robinson does. I think a lot of the community relations success that Chief Hall had and that they had under Chief Brown after your departure from the department, Shawn, goes right to Jolie's success. And when, back to when Ryan asked me how, what I see ahead for Dallas, the last time I checked with Jolie, she still hadn't decided or made public what she's going to do. But it's like with young leaders like her in place in this city, we will get better. And I think that, wherever she lands, that's an area of the city that's going to improve. But I do mourn her leaving the police department, because I think the police department needs Jolie Robinsons who can talk to people in all neighborhoods and make them feel heard, or let them feel heard.
Sharon, I think this is the first time on our show, and we haven't had a lot of journalists, but it just goes to show what a good journalist you are. You turned the interviewer into an interviewee, and made Shawn answer some questions for once. So that was great. And we know